Majesty, the veiled prophet, in his great wisdom, has selected the fairest maid of his beloved city of St. Louis to reign over his court of love and beauty until his coming again.
The veiled prophet was sort of a deity to me. There was Jesus, there was Moses, there was the veiled prophet. He was awesome in that old sense of awesome, where he inspired awe, but also some degree of fear. It was why you bowed to him, because he would be kind to you so long as you bowed to him. And everybody bowed to him. Nobody didn't bow to him.
Well, the Veiled Prophet is a secret society that has existed since 1878.
If the city did not live up to what it was supposed to be and how it was supposed to behave, there could be consequences. This was not a lovable deity.
You know, these people control our livelihoods, but they're hiding behind this mask. We want to know who these people are.
You know, on the bullhorn, we used to say that the VP must go, the VP must go, and we're going to unveil the veiled prophet or something of that nature. And there used to be like a laughter. No one ever took us serious.
Kwame, why are you here supporting the Ku Klux Klan?
What?
Why are you here supporting the Ku Klux Klan?
No, I'm not supporting the Ku Klux.
That's what the veiled prophet is.
Veiled prophet.
Well, I hope you don't mind complications. Well, I hope you don't mind it if I bleed. I hope that you're strong like a willow, and that you might give me what I need, and that you might give me everything I need. So hold me and squeeze me, love me and need me, kiss me and feed me, and catch me if I fall. Love me, don't leave me, hug me and squeeze me like the queen of love and beauty at the veiled prophet's ball.
I'm trying to find out what veiled prophet stands for.
We don't know. We've been searching for the answer for that one for something like 60 years.
You don't really believe that veiled prophet originates from a chapter of the Ku Klux Klan, do you?
No, absolutely not. No, that's a false rumor.
The idea was that this was what set St. Louis above all other places. So it was the kind of fairy tale that you might think of that made a mountain very special or made a valley very special. This was a fairy tale that made St. Louis unique among cities. The power of the veiled prophet is always there. It is not embodied in the man who fills the costume. The veiled prophet goes beyond any single individual. It's a power that arrives from somewhere else and then sort of lives for this moment.
He's sort of this mystical figure from a fictional land somewhere in the Middle East, vaguely. The legend is that he's this figure that's traveled around and he's decided to bless St. Louis with his presence.
He was here to help to get St. Louis to this, this place of being the greatest city in the world. They didn't just say America, okay? They said the world. the organization put out this book, which sort of laid out the myth of the veiled prophet for children.
I think most parents, sort of in, shall we say, my social class in St. Louis, owned a copy of this children's book because it had been given out as a favor. The picture book sat by my bed. My father came in and read it to me. It's not a very good book for children. There were all these signs of kind of warlike imagery and action going on, in the language of war and violence was throughout the book. It didn't seem to belong there with this, nice guy in the white robes who comes to St. Louis. It was only when I started researching the book and thinking, where did this guy come from, that I found that there was an old legend set in the Middle East, in the land of Khorasan, and there actually is an area called Khorasan in Iran.
So Al-Mukana, the Veiled One, is a military commander, and he does have his face covered. Why is the guy's face covered? Is he good looking? Is he ugly? We don't know. Freaks us out. So this Al-Mukana was a real person. Khorasan was a real place. Actual events happened. He became legendary in that area. A 19th century Irishman, Thomas More, who decides he's going to turn this into a romantic poem and then further sort of romanticizes the whole thing.
And people gobbled up this book-length story of an evil sorcerer. And he was also a kind of ghost, or zombie or skeleton or something strange. Inside, there was a nothing inside the robes. There was nothing there. Who rapes and kidnaps a young woman from a neighboring area. And eventually her lover comes to fetch her back. There's been a great kind of Jonestown-style massacre that the veiled prophet has engineered. And he places Zelika, the young woman in question, in his costume. And her lover accidentally skewers her and kills her, thinking that he's killing the veiled prophet. This imagery had been taken from the Moore book and planted into the children's book. Phrase after phrase after phrase had been lifted from the poem, which meant to me that the people who wrote the children's book knew the poem. They knew the origin of the story. So they had written a story in which Darth Vader was this kind of beneficent god, but they knew they had taken it from a story where he was the embodiment of evil. So it was really a shock. If they had ever questioned the veiled prophet and found their way back to the Moore poem, they would have found that they were setting up a fairy tale with a very evil figure at its helm. So to my family, the veiled prophet meant status. My family had fallen in status. So the veiled prophet and the fact that my father belonged to the veiled prophet society, that his sister had been a veiled prophet queen, this kept us in the running for a place of privilege in St. Louis society.
As a child growing up, I have memories of going to look at the parade and looking at the Queen and all of that. And I must have said something about, oh, I'd like to be the Queen someday, or some childish thing. And I remember my mother saying, you will never be the Queen because you're Jewish.
There were no Jewish people invited to the ball. Obviously, no Black people, no Asian people, definitely no Jews.
They introduced their daughters to society so that then they can marry the sons of the other elite people. And this goes on year after year after year. but it served the same purpose that it had already always served, and that was to celebrate elitism and wealth, and keep that wealth within certain families.
The Queen of Love and Beauty, which is also called the Veiled Prophet Queen, is the debutante who is chosen every year, wears a crown, has a very, in particular walk, is the last debutante.
She comes up all the way up the stairs and bows right at his feet, and he places the tiara on her head. And then she rises up from that bow and goes and sits in the throne chair next to the veiled prophet. So it's a sort of symbolic marriage.
The first belle of the ball was Susie Slayback, daughter of VP creator Alonzo Slayback. Since that time, the VP Queen has always been a jewel of St. Louis society.
It's like being anointed a princess. Now you're royalty in St. Louis.
The biggest mystery of the Veiled Prophet was that nobody got to know who he was.
Generally, the membership has been secret.
People have to pass vetting. They are initiated. They're sworn to secrecy.
So my father knew who he was, but he was sworn to secrecy. He said he couldn't tell his wife. He couldn't tell his children. I assumed that they were directing the fate of the city, whether everyone would be safe, and that they were in charge. That was the sense, that they were in charge and they were making very big decisions.
His mysterious majesty, the Veiled Prophet, and his Queen of Love and Beauty made their way through the streets of downtown St. Louis with a big parade.
The Honorary Grand Marshal, Jerry Greenwald, Vice Chairman of the Board of Chrysler Corporation, and a native St. Louisan, shared the honor of hosting the parade with the Veiled Prophet and his Queen of Love and Beauty.
And then they would end with these huge fireworks shows, and the fair would have big acts under the arch.
The Great Fair of 1982 attracted almost 4 million people. The crowd, plus entertainers like Elton John and the Beach Boys, made the national and international press sit up and take notice. And that's exactly what VP and civic officials want the fair to do each year.
What do you think of the fair? You've only seen a little of it so far, but what are your impressions?
I think it's a wonderful idea. You know, the whole VP idea is great. It's rare you get an opportunity like this to go out and strut your stuff for more than, 100,000 at a time.
Welcome aboard the Texas deck of the Robert E. Lee. With me is Alex Cornwell, who is the general chairman of the VP Fair Foundation, and this is the Veiled Prophet Fair, but the P-R-O-F-I-T, so that it is not veiled. What happens to the proceeds from this year's fair?
This is glaringly obvious in the Veiled Prophet group. I mean, what's the most obvious thing about the people who are members of it? They're wealthy. So you can ask yourself, well, how much more wealth and power? You're already rich. You already run the city. So why do you need a secret society to do that? Well, because you need the secret society to do it because you can manage things through the society in ways that you can't through the ballot box. Political process is open to public scrutiny.
So, yes, you have elected government. Yes, you have government officials. But in some ways, the Veiled Prophet becomes its own kind of shadow government. It's the group of people who can get stuff done. The Veiled Prophet did include federal judges. It had included at least one Missouri governor. Eventually, if you move forward, it's going to include the director of the FBI. It's going to include a lot of people who are getting presidential appointments from St. Louis. William H. Webster in 1978, he's appointed by Carter to be the director of the FBI. He had been a federal judge. And when that happens, it comes out in his confirmation hearings that he is a member of the Veiled Prophet organization.
Today, I leave one proud institution in American life, the FBI, to join another one, the Central Intelligence Agency.
What changes in the 20th century is that as corporate America comes in, they choose people who are prominent St. Louisans because they wanted to have some local folks where their factories were, where their main production was, all of that. The point at which St. Louis runs into problems is when these children of St. Louis have taken over the major corporations.
The quality of black life in St. Louis today is a partial reflection of the history of blacks in that city. Black Enterprise magazine says, quote, "St. Louis is an enigma, a 20th century city with a mentality still rooted in the Missouri Compromise," end quote.
I said there was nobody like Percy Green before or after. He's like the dividing line as far as civil rights in St. Louis, because he was really believed in doing some really creative types of demonstrations, something that had never been seen before. He was fighting for jobs because that's how you advance in this society. We live in a capitalist society. You got to have money. He put it in people's faces, and he wouldn't let them hide.
He likes to get to know people, and he doesn't stay surface. He likes to get below the surface, partly to know what you're capable of and what you're willing to do.
Percy had a reputation for staging things.
Percy had this sense of strategy and a sense of what would attract attention.
What we're doing right now is we're doing a reconnaissance, searching for some Wonder Bread or Hostess trucks in the neighborhood. And what we plan to do is to let them lead us to the stores that they are still putting the bread in. We're boycotting all Wonder Bread and Hostess product for fair and equal employment for blacks.
Well, Percy Green is, of course, he started this organization called Action.
Action was a civil rights group that promoted jobs for, at the time, what was said, Negro males.
The strategy of direct action protest was effective in that it educates the community at large that something is wrong, which is why we would be protesting.
And we will go in and ask the merchant once again to withdraw the product. And upon him failing to do so, a picket line will be thrown up around his store.
I'm saying that's the company's policy, right?
I don't really know what it is. I just do what they tell me.
How can you follow it if you don't know what it is?
Well, I just do what they tell me.
So this was part of educating the community, hitting the companies individually, showing how they are practicing racism and whatnot.
That action taken there at Kroger Supermarket was to sensitize that particular store, making them aware of the fact that, as far as we're concerned, we're holding them just as much as responsible for stocking this bread, knowing that we are boycotting the product.
There's definitely a boycott against Kroger's. There's definitely a boycott against Kroger for support overt white racism.
It is equally important for whites to have their share of the menial jobs as it is for blacks to have their share of the better paying jobs.
Yeah, one of the reasons that Percy decided that he was going to climb the arch was to protest the fact that blacks weren't working on the construction of the arch.
And told them that we were going to remain there until they hire 1,000 blacks in all job classifications. 30 days afterwards, I was mysteriously laid off from my job as a research and development technician. I then filed my complaint that I was being discriminated against, not only because of my color and race and what have you, but because of my civil rights activities.
He sued, and that case went all the way to the Supreme Court.
And that's still the foundation for labor law.
I've been confronted by the FBI's Coin and Tail program, where they attempted to disrupt the organization by trying to create problems for marriages. They used to call my wife at the time, my son's mother, tell her, we need you to come downtown to the morgue and claim the body. We think this is your husband, Percy Green, and whatnot. You know, she had to overcome something like that any number of times. And then, of course, with Jane, I mean, they contacted her husband saying that she was sleeping with black male members of the organization, stuff like that.
Office of the FBI wrote a letter to him, basically said, the only thing your wife wants to integrate is the bed. It was written like it was from black women, and that she's shucking and jiving on Newstead Avenue, and man, get her off the street. And some people have said, well, that was the termination of our marriage, but our marriage was terminated before that. That was just kind of the final straw.
They suffered a lot because of that. They made a lot of sacrifices. They lost jobs. Well, Percy does not let up.
We also discovered that these chief executive officers were also part of an all-white group that was known as the Veil Prophet.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, we're here at the VP Fair, and as you're looking now, you're looking south towards the old cathedral. And as you can see, this is the avenue of corporate flags here at the VP Fair. Every corporation that has sponsored the VP Fair got a flag to put up here on the flagpole with the American flags. It's a constant reminder as to who you owe all this terrible enjoyment to here at the VP Fair.
I mean, these were the people that control the corporations, and black people were not getting jobs.
Concealed power has a kind of added advantage over revealed power. If you know what you're fighting, then you know what you can use against it. It's like being in the dark, and you know there's some sort of monster, there's some sort of animal, but you don't know what. You don't know what weapons would be effective against it. Remember, a person with no face can be nobody, they can be anybody.
Protests of the White Veil Prophet festivities was strictly part of a strategy to enhance our protests for fair employment at certain big businesses. And the names of those companies were Southwestern Bell Telephone, of course it's now AT&T, Laclede Gas Company, now Spear, Union Electric, now Amarin, McDonnell Douglas Corporation, now Boeing.
It was the largest air show in a downtown area. Once a day, spectators saw a rare sight of the McDonnell Douglas F-15 fighter. It is the premier fighter for this country.
You're talking about the people who run the city. They're head of the banks, head of the utilities, major corporations like Anheuser-Busch. If they don't like you, they can make your life miserable.
Percy went after a fat target. He went after the elites with their secret little veiled prophet guy and the queen.
It can go down in history as being something that is noble and royal and something to look up to, or we can disrupt it.
Percy Green used to chain himself to floats. They would interrupt parades to do what they called, sort of social justice theater, guerrilla theater.
Then they started their own veil prophet, black veil prophet, to sort of, mock the white veil prophet.
They would come with tickets and say, you know, I'm the veiled prophet, I'm the queen, let us in. And of course they'd be refused, and there would be a scuffle at the entry, and it would hit the news, which was like better than nothing.
Here you have an opportunity to inform the community that now you can see how this racism is being manifested. I mean, they also are socially tied to a group that is all racist, and then is consciously racist. This group, the VP, was born from the Confederate group, the Slaybacks, back in 1877.
The Slayback brothers are generally seen as the creators of the Veiled Prophet.
So Alonzo Slayback, as I understand it, was described at the time as a swashbuckler.
He was very sympathetic to the South, and when the war broke out, he wound up joining the Confederate service. He was a cavalryman.
Remember, we sit right on the Mason-Dixon line. And the South runs up as far north as St. Louis.
His brother, Charles Slayback, had lived in New Orleans for a while and had been in one of the crews down there for Carnival, Mardi Gras.
The Mystic Crew of Comus, which is one of the secret societies in New Orleans.
Mystic Crew of Comus was the first, or claimed to be the first, of the Mardi Gras crews. Comus is the god of revelry, but one of the things you always have to keep in mind is that gods and goddesses almost always had sort of two sides. If you're the god of good times, if you're the god of revelry and merrymaking, well, you're also the god of of the dark side of that. I mean, that is a deliberate decision which they made to identify with that particular deity. Take that and move it upriver to St. Louis.
And they bring up floats from the New Orleans Mardi Gras.
In some ways, literally the first one, at least, was a secondhand Mardi Gras.
So beginning in 1878, the Veiled Prophet organization is formed and holds its first parade.
On that first October night, an estimated third of the city's population of 330,000 turned out to witness the first parade. The first parade was called the Nocturnal Illumination Pageant.
The most obvious thing in here is the presence of the all-seeing eye. It's a common motif in Masonic imagery, and it's ancient.
But those first Veiled Prophet parades were held at night, so they had to get, people to walk along the parade route holding torches to light this parade. And, the figure of the Veiled Prophet himself, when you look at those sort of early depictions of the Veiled Prophet, it's hard not to see some connections to things like the Ku Klux Klan in that early costuming of the Veiled Prophet. So you can imagine a parade led by someone who's dressed like he's in the Ku Klux Klan, with people sort of carrying torches through the streets of St. Louis. That's a pretty striking visual image, right?
We had to show how all of this came together with all of this racism, and then pointed out that not only that this was tied, that was anti-blacks, but they were anti-working class in general.
Workers had it really rough in the mid-19th century in St. Louis and throughout the United States, really.
The people that are the working class, they find themselves in the predicament of having to do whatever they can to get some of the crumbs in order to be able to sustain life for themselves or whatnot. And therefore, that brings about the conflict.
What causes people to flood into the streets? It's not one event. It's like decades and decades and decades of disenfranchisement. you become, it's almost like a powder keg. You're ready to explode. I mean, how much can you take? So, I mean, workers had had enough, and they do what workers do when they try to assert their rights. They went on strike.
The 1877 railroad strike began in Martinsburg, West Virginia. It became like a prairie fire, and it just kept spreading and spreading, and you could watch it on a map move west. You know, it hit St. Louis 2 days later. It works its way all the way to San Francisco. There were about 1 million railroad workers on strike throughout the country. And it was the most massive strike in American history. The Great Railroad Strike was very violent in some places, Pittsburgh especially. In Pittsburgh, they had burned, I think, 1,000 locomotives and railroad cars, railroad property. In Chicago, there were firefights in the streets between workers and police and militias. About 1,000 railroad workers in East St. Louis met at the train depot and decided to go on strike at midnight. Workers from St. Louis ferried over to East St. Louis, hundreds of them singing the Marseillaise from the French Revolution, and joined them. The St. Louis strike in 1877 is considered to be the first general strike in American history.
Everybody's involved. It's not just the railroad people or the Coopers. It was the entire city.
And black and white workers were together on the strike for a change. And that scared the hell out of the white power structure.
This was a very racist time in American society. And so as a result, there's a question of whether the white workers would unite with black workers toward a common goal. And they did in St. Louis. They didn't do that everywhere, but they did in St. Louis.
If you look at slavery would be considered as part of the working class. It just happened that you had a group of people that were not getting paid anything versus those that were getting paid.
Black workers from the steamship came to one of these meetings, and one of them said, if we strike, will you support us? And the crowd yelled, "We will."
The city was paralyzed. In a lot of places, the workers had blocked the streets by taking streetcars and turning them sideways, and just created a situation where you couldn't really do commerce, you couldn't really do anything.
The important thing is to disrupt, and then of course when you disrupt, you cause an economic pressure on the subject matter that you disrupted. It becomes a cost factor and an image factor.
That's really a moment when laborers in St. Louis are sort of claiming the streets of the city as theirs. Those strikers are in charge in that moment.
If you're going to die, it's better to die from bullets than starvation. And that's the way they saw themselves at that time. The workers in St. Louis were demanding socialism. They wanted a socialist government. They wanted social welfare programs, and they wanted to take the industry away from the capitalists and give it to the workers. And the strike was taken over by the Workingmen's Party of the United States, which was the first Marxist, communist political party in the Western Hemisphere. The Workingmen's Party was actually running the city. They were providing city services. They were protecting property. They were patrolling the streets. No businesses could operate in St. Louis without their permission. That was all part of a world socialist revolutionary movement that was occurring at that time. There's the Paris Commune, where workers took over the city of Paris in 1871. After that failed, they had to leave the country, so a lot of them came to St. Louis. After the 1848 German Revolution, that failed, and they had to come to the United States, and they came to St. Louis. And they would carry red flags which was the symbol of revolution from the Paris Commune. They raised that as an example of what they were doing, and so it became known in St. Louis as the St. Louis Commune when they took over the city. The American capitalists were scared to death of the same thing happening in the United States, and particularly in St. Louis, that the workers would rise up, they would take over their factories, they would take away their property, and they would institute communism in its place. The St. Louis authorities, officials, they had no power whatsoever in the city. The rich were sleeping in their clothes, had bathtubs full of water,
They know they do not have numbers on their side. There are more working class folks. There are more people who are probably sympathetic to those folks.
The leadership here, tried to figure out what to do.
Contacting the president, asking for federal troops, asking for arms.
And the mayor and some other people put together a militia.
John G. Priest was the police chief, and he led the attack on the St. Louis Commune. There was a meeting of businessmen with the mayor of St. Louis, Mayor Overstolz, and he wanted to put down the strike. And he issued an order that said, don't take any prisoners, shoot them on the spot. The cavalry were running down citizens in the street.
The strike ends up being broken up when, federal troops, as long as a specially deputized police force come out in and violently break that strike.
When the St. Louis Commune is crushed in July and August of 1877, then they have a big military parade to show that they own the streets again. The St. Louis elite does. About 100,000 people watched it. They had about 5,000 people marching in the parade, all kinds of military weapons and brass and guns and all kinds of things. And they had this massive parade to show that it's our streets. It's no longer the workers' streets. It's our streets. We've taken them back, and this is the way that it's going to be. After that first big parade, an idea is formed, and a letter goes out secretly to all the big business people in St. Louis. And it says, we're going to form a new organization, a secret organization of the St. Louis elite.
Charles Slayback, a transplanted New Orleanian with fond memories of the Mardi Gras, called a special meeting of 20 prominent local businessmen. A dozen showed up. They met on March 20th, 1878 at the old Lindell Hotel to set up a mystic and secret society dedicated to promoting St. Louis to the world as an outstanding commercial center. Slayback turned to his younger brother, Colonel Alonzo Slayback, to conjure up all the mystical and romantic notions of a veiled potentate from the land of Khorasan, who would arrive in St. Louis each October to preside over a pageant and grand ball. The first mysterious potentate was called the Grand Oracle, and even though he wore a mask and veil to cover his eyes, he failed to pull the wool over the spectators' eyes that first night. He was quickly identified as real estate tycoon John G. Priest.
Priest was a police commissioner that helped to put together the Citizens Militia that raided Schuler Hall and broke the St. Louis General Strike of 1877. So there's a direct connection between that strike and the Veiled Prophet.
The earliest versions of the Veiled Prophet, he's holding a shotgun and a pistol, right?
The description of the float says that there is essentially a blood-curdling executioner's block on the float, and it even says that essentially says that no one's going to stop the Veiled Prophet.
That also, by the way, could be the significance of having the all-seeing eye on your pageant float. The implication is that it's not God watching you, it's us watching you.
The Grand Oracle is another word that is, or another phrase that is used for the Veiled Prophet itself.
We are the all-seeing eye. We observe all and know all. Again, it's just part of this mind game. class psychological warfare.
The other interesting thing that is different about St. Louis's strike is that there were a lot of black workers that were in part of that strike. And that made it very different, and it's also one of the reasons people have said that the first veiled prophet had the white pointed hat, was that it was a reference to the fact, and again, at that day and time, black workers would have understood that.
Yeah, they won back in 1870s. And it's been hard to get that coalition of black and white workers together again.
It's hard for me to believe that something this big could be totally forgotten and not a part of what people know about the United States unless there was a very real attempt to suppress it. Now, I have no evidence that there was a conspiracy to do that, but I find it really difficult to understand how St. Louis could be the first general strike in American history where the entire city was closed down, everyone was on strike, where it could be the only time in American history where a major city was ruled by a communist party, and no one in the city knows anything about it.
You see the 4th of July parade in downtown St. Louis, and you don't imagine that parade might have its roots in a battleground over, who controls the city in the wake of a massive strike in the 1870s.
And it became this big community thing, and everybody was celebrating, but no one knew what they were celebrating. And what they were celebrating, of course, was the destruction of the working class in St. Louis. But nobody knew that anymore because they had done a wonderful job of covering that up.
In fact, according to our random sampling of this year's fairgoers, the definitive question was, what's a veiled prophet? Is that still a question?
What's a veiled prophet?
What was that question?
Prophet with a veil?
I don't know.
I don't know.
You're putting me on the spot.
Say again?
What?
Do you have any idea?
What is what?
No idea.
For those of you who don't know what a veiled prophet is, here's the story.
It all got started in the spring of 1878 when a group of civic-minded St. Louis business leaders got together to dream up a super spectacular attraction that would draw bigger crowds to the great agricultural and mechanical exposition held in St. Louis every October. During the 1960s, the veiled prophet became the target of enraged civil rights groups. They raised objections to wealthy suburbanites in a closed organization flaunting their wealth through public streets. The civil rights group Action filed a lawsuit challenging the veiled prophet organization's right to hold its private parties in Kiel Auditorium, a public facility.
We had already announced at the picket line that we're going to unveil the veiled prophet, and it became like a typical joke. What if we could get some people get inside, and that would they get close enough to actually unveil the veiled prophet?
So I'm in school in Southern California, and 2 letters arrived, and this invitation arrived, which should not have been a surprise because I had always known that I would need to be presented at this ball. And the other one arrives from Percy Green, and it says, "We know you hate this just as much as we do." And it is this, terrible display of imperialist and racist power. And so we know you want to help us bring this thing down. And the way you can do it is give up your tickets. So you get 2 tickets, yourself and your date. Give up your tickets, give them to us, and we will use them to fight the good fight. And I wrote Percy Green back and said, what are you even talking about? Find bigger fish to fry.
Eventually, someone from within decided to send us some tickets. Then it was a matter of, hey, how can we utilize them? But it would have to be our whites. I mean, we couldn't use no black folks walk over there with the invitation. Some of our seasoned white members volunteered, and that was Gina and James Howard.
I was very worried about looking Jewish. I do remember thinking, oh my God, I hope that my identity isn't revealed. And I had 3 children, so assuming that I would get arrested, I had to have someone that would take my children and so forth. So it was sort of complicated.
Then Jane and Gina, all they had to do was dress up. They had the white skin, and then they could just walk right on in with the invitation just like anybody else,
But then when it came down to kind of really doing it, I think we both became apprehensive. Like I remember my mother saying at one time, I know we taught you about all this, but we didn't expect you to act on it.
There are something close to 10,000 people in the room. So it's supposed to look like a huge kind of Babylonish royal court, the kind of thing you would see in one of those paintings of harems. The St. Louis Symphony Orchestra is playing. There are various people dressed in Middle Eastern costumes with lances that they sort of banged on the floor from time to time, who were supposed to be looking sort of vaguely Middle Eastern militant. And a lot of them had fake beards and that kind of thing plastered on their faces.
Now it's a matter of how could they, once they're in, how could they maneuver to get themselves close enough to the VP to actually unveil it.
We didn't have a plan because we didn't know the situation. I remember there was a loudspeaker that introduced these women.
The announcer would call out, "The veiled prophet welcomes to his court of love and beauty, Miss Lucy Ann Ferris." And you made your way toward the throne where the veiled prophet was sitting. And at the bottom of the stairs, you went down for a full bow.
Seeing a young woman bow before this veiled thing was just, oh my God, that sent me into outer space. I just couldn't believe that she would do this, or that they would want her to do it.
And I did my bow, and I went and sat on the chair, and there were all these fancy things around the auditorium and everything dressed up like a royal court. And it brought me back to the way I had felt as a child. Like many teenagers, I had judged all the girls in my class and decided I was the ugliest. And one of the things about this ball was that it was a court of love and beauty, and it sort of made everybody beautiful. I did feel that I had somehow been made beautiful, and I was part of something beautiful. I felt that I had been transformed, and that this ritual had somehow transformed me from an ugly duckling into a swan.
So we did go upstairs, which is where the service people were, and we're looking around about what to do.
They want to unmask the prophet. Well, the prophet is way down there, okay? The prophet is not real close.
And Gina saw this cable, and she tugged on it, and she said, "I think this will hold me." So that was the moment where we developed the plan. And she said, I'll slide down this cable and you go on the other side and throw the leaflets over, start throwing the leaflets over. Everybody will turn and look at the source of the leaflets, and that will give me cover to slide down.
And I vaguely noticed paper falling from the ceiling, which was, after all, very high ceiling. So the eyes of the crowd had gone in that direction.
As soon as the heads turned toward the leaflets, Gina slid down the cable.
Kind of what looked like a big bat coming down, and then I realized it was a woman in a long dress.
The cable came loose from the wall, and she wound up falling.
And that's when she broke her ribs.
And then she said that somebody, stagehand or somebody, came up there to try to give her a helping hand. She told, get away from me or whatnot, and with her dressed up in her gown and everything, the stagehand adhered to her command.
And she actually encountered another security person en route and said, there's somebody really hurt back there. And he rushed past her to go help whoever was hurt, and that put her in a straight line to the VP.
And all of a sudden, she's standing next to the Veiled Prophet.
She then grabbed the mask and pulled it from his head and threw it out there in the middle of the floor.
And all these cameras go off.
At which time she said she heard everybody say, "Ooh," you know. The VP's bald head, he turned around and looked at her, and he looked so shocked and surprised or whatnot.
Other than the very first Veiled Prophet, none of them had ever been, in this case, I guess, literally exposed publicly.
And sitting where the Veiled Prophet had been was Tom K. Smith, who was the head of Monsanto Chemical Company. I really did have a kind of gut punch feeling.
And finally, one of the lancers, or whatever you call the guys that look like soldiers that's standing up there next to him, reached down and picked up the mask and then tried to put it back on his head or whatnot,
That moment of silence was the place where you felt the whole room kind of deciding, did this happen, or did this, what we just saw, did it not happen? And when the orchestra struck up again and the special maid finished her bow and so forth, then the decision had been made, this did not happen, and we are going to carry on.
They were somewhat thrown by it being two white women. It was obvious that's how we got in. And then they took me out a back entrance and just kind of pushed me out.
I was, I was elated. You couldn't have asked for anything more. They never, in their wildest dream, ever thought that we would be capable of doing anything like that.
I mean, it was the talk of St. Louis. It was the talk of the town. I mean, nothing like that had ever happened before. Nobody even tried before, to my understanding.
And almost 100 years of secrecy, and that was destroyed.
Once that kind of image is shattered, you can't put it back together. It's Humpty Dumpty. It's broken.
It's never been the same since. It's never been the same since. So by unveiling that Veiled Prophet, that was taking the mask off of these corporate leaders who control things, who control our livelihoods, who control whether or not we have a job, who control where we live, who control whether I can buy food, who control whether I can pay my utility bills, who control the quality of my life.
They did arrest Gina, but then they dropped the charges because obviously when they got legal advice, the Veiled Prophet who was not supposed to be known, could not appear in court in the costume, but would have to appear in court as the person he was.
Well, because they dropped it because they didn't want to identify. They knew that we had them by the nose.
She received a number of threats.
A couple nights later, she saw a bright light outside her window and looked out, and someone had set her car on fire.
Then the car bombing of her car, I think, was the first realization. There can be violence as retribution for this.
So she left town for a while and finally made her way back. But she was definitely being targeted. There were two newspapers, morning and evening, Democrat and Republican, in St. Louis at the time. And both of them devoted their front page to the Veiled Prophet. But neither article mentioned Tom K. Smith. I believe one of them mentioned that there was a disturbance and that the veil had been knocked off, but in their words, no one could see who the prophet was, so that the myth had not been disturbed. Which made it obvious that the press was in on I hate to call it a cover-up.
The controversial thing was all those cameras went off, but no one saw the picture. I reached out to Tom K. Smith directly. I remember saying, can you tell me about the unveiling? What was that like? And he said, I don't know what you're talking about. I mean, I have no idea. And I'm like, dude, it's clear that was you. And he said, what do you mean? And I did like the, one of those great moments where, I hold up the picture and say, this you? And he says, I don't know. I know nothing about that.
Back in the back rooms, the Veiled Prophet Society was making some plans. What were we going to do now?
I guess the fair people got a little embarrassed by everything. They invited a few blacks into the organization. It had been all white.
He sued the city of St. Louis so that they could not be at the Kill anymore.
In 1973, the VP organization announced it was abandoning Kiel as the site for the ball. The ball was then moved to the Chase Hotel. And then, bowing to the charges of racism, the VP organization admitted 3 black physicians into the inner circle in 1979.
And he kept it up. They changed the name.
It's kind of like British Petroleum. When its brand was not so popular anymore, it became BP. The same thing happened with the Veiled Prophet organization. So instead of the Veiled Prophet parade and so on and so forth, it became the VP fair.
That VP, still Veiled Prophet. You don't say it's Veiled Prophet. Then it changed it to Fair St. Louis. Now it celebrates St. Louis.
At the same time, there was an actress, I can't remember her name, who was recently outed as having participated in the Veiled Prophet ball.
An apology tonight from a famous St. Louis comedic actress, Ellie Kemper. In her apology, she blasts the St. Louis's Veiled Prophet organization.
Kemper, who comes from a well-to-do St. Louis family, has posted an apology on Instagram. The Veiled Prophet organization has also issued a statement saying, in part, it's part apology here, the organization of today categorically rejects racism in any form and is committed to diversity and equity in our membership, community service initiatives, and support for the region.
When you're trying to get people to let go of power, whether you're talking about, political power or, literal, in other parts of the world, authoritarians or what have you, it's a tough nut to crack once they've figured out how to concentrate it. And in fact, if you're paying attention to your latest discussions of what the Veiled Prophet is doing to take the Veiled Prophet out of the Veiled Prophet currently, is they're beginning to call him the Grand Oracle. So that has actually come back.
Secret societies that are suppressed are almost never destroyed. They just become something else. Look, you just reinvent it. That's what you did to begin with. You just made something up. So how hard of it is just to make it, just give it a different name.
So I think the veil isn't partly there because it's the costume that is the power. If there were any face associated with it, then it would be something that would eventually die out. And it wasn't, this was immortal. The veiled prophet, definitely immortal.
For your enjoyment this evening, His Mysterious Majesty, the Veiled Prophet, is happy to present His Majesty's Royal Crew. Hey!